Okay, this is going to be first lesson in Unit 2. It's going to be graphing transformations. We're going to first start talking about concepts involving domain and range. But in order to do that, you have to do something called labeling an arrow. And let me explain, okay? All right? When you look at whether it's something like this, or something like this, okay? One of the things we're going to need to do in order to do domain and range, all right, increasing, decreasing, and end behaviors is able to label an arrow, okay? So when you label an arrow, you're going to label it, okay, like a coordinate, okay? Now here's how this coordinate breaks down, okay? If it is a left arrow, okay, we're going to put negative infinity. If it is a right arrow, we are going to put positive infinity, okay? So how you figure out the left and right, just hold your hand up. Okay, whichever arrow is furthest left is the left arrow. So that would be negative infinity. This is the right arrow, so positive infinity. Now, the second coordinate, if the arrow is pointing down, it's negative infinity. If that arrow is pointing up, it's going to be positive infinity. So this arrow is pointing up, so this is positive infinity. This arrow is pointing up, so it is also positive infinity. And that's how you label an arrow, okay? Now, let's look at these. All right, let's do another one, okay? Let's say this were the case, okay? Well, if I hold this up, this is the left arrow. So negative infinity, this is the right arrow, which is positive. This arrow is going up, positive. Now this arrow is going down, so that's negative. Okay, and that's how you label the arrow, okay? So what I would like you guys to do is, I would like you to go ahead and label these two arrows on your own. See if you can practice that, left arrow, right arrow, okay? Now, when we're doing domain, we're gonna talk about domain and range, which you have a little familiarity with in Algebra 1. Domain is your smallest x value to your biggest x value. So if you look at your points that we make, this is the x, this is the y, okay? Now, so domain is x, range is y. Now, when you're doing the domain and range, what you want to do is label your arrows, which we just talked about, if you have them, okay? We want to label our turns, put it that way. And we want to label any endpoints we have, okay? Because through that, especially if we have continuous functions, we're going to be able to tell the domain and range, okay? So let's go look at a picture, okay? Now these don't have arrows, okay? But this point here is 0, 4. This point here is negative 5 over 5 up, okay? So if I'm doing domain, okay, my smallest x value is, these are my x values. My smallest number, what's smaller, negative 5 or 0? Negative 5. Now since it has an open circle, I put a curved bracket, so that's going to be negative 5, okay? All right? Since this has a filled-in circle, that's going to be 0, okay? Now, another way to write this, okay, is x is less than negative 5, less than or equal to 0. So basically, if you do the inequalities always going in that way, this one does not have a line or anything. When it's open, all right, no line, curved bracket, okay? If it has a dot in it, it's got a squared bracket or a line underneath of it. The range, okay? So my range is the y values, okay? So that's negative 4, okay? My smallest y value, is it 5 or negative 4? It is negative 4. Now, since that's at a closed-in circle, I can do that. My biggest y value is a positive 5. Now, since that's an open circle, it'd be that. So for the range, here's another way of writing that. Negative y less than 5. Now, once again, the 5 didn't get that little line or anything. So two ways to write the domain and range there, okay? Let's do another one together, okay? Now, this one's an endpoint that's -5 over, -3 down, okay? This one is a turn. I'm going to call that 3, 0, okay? And then this one is 1, 3, okay? Now, if I look at the domain, all of the x values, what is my smallest x value? It is -5. And since it's at a dot like that, it would be here, okay? What's my biggest x value? It's 3. Now, someone's going to ask, Mr. Evans, how do I know whether that's a filled-in circle or not? Unless you see a big open circle, you can always assume filled in. So that's going to be filled in at 3. So you can write it like this, or like that. The reason why they both have lines underneath them, both square brackets. Okay? Range. Here are my y values. My smallest y value is -3. Since it's at a filled in dot, it's that. My biggest y value is 3. Or you can write it as -3 y 3. Okay? Let's do one more together. Okay? I'm going to label this. That's -3 over, -3 down. That's 2 over, 2 up. That's 4 over, -2 down. Okay? Now, so I'm gonna do my x's for domain. The smallest x of all three of these is -3. The biggest is 4. Okay? All right? So you could also write that like this. My smallest y value is -3. So now I'm going to do the range, y values. Smallest y value is -3. Biggest y value is 2. Once again, that could be written like this. Domain is x, range is y. Okay? All right, go ahead and you do the next 3 in your notes packet. Okay, now we're getting into some arrows now. Okay? This is a left arrow, okay? So that is -infinity. That arrow is pointing up. Okay, all right. This is 2, -2. This is a right arrow pointing up. Okay, so left arrow pointing up, right arrow pointing up. Labeled that point. Now, if I look through all these, sometimes people will get confused with the infinities. Think of infinity like -1, negative infinity like -100. Let's say 2 and 100. What would be the smallest one of those numbers? -100. So we're going to do that as -infinity. Now, your infinity symbols always get open or curved brackets. Okay? All right? Your biggest out of those would be infinity. Now, you can consider that all real numbers. Okay? All right? If you did write it, it'd be -infinity to x to infinity. There is no line underneath any of those. Okay? The range is y's. Okay? So for my range, I've got infinity or 100. I got -2. I got 100. What's the smallest one there? That's -2. Okay, what's the biggest? 100 or infinity? Once again, another way you could write that. Just like that. Okay? All right, a bunch of different ways to write it. All right? Okay? Now, this is a left arrow, so -infinity, going down, so negative. This is a right arrow, so positive infinity, positive. Okay? All right, this point right here is 0 over 6 up. Okay? So my domain, -infinity, 0 or infinity. That's going to be -infinity. Okay? The biggest one, -infinity, 0 or infinity, that's infinity. So you can write that as this if you want. All right, or you can say all real numbers. Either one is correct. Range, y values. Okay, smallest y is -infinity. 6, infinity is also that. So that's also all real numbers. Okay, all right. So either one. If you want to do those, you just got to be able to recognize both. Okay, now, I only have one arrow here. So in this case, that is a right arrow going down. This is just a dot at 3, 0. Once again, I can assume that dot is closed unless I see a big open circle. All right, so I'm going to do domain. Smallest x value is 3. Biggest is infinity. All right, so that's 3 to infinity. So that's x is greater than or equal to 3. Okay. Range, smallest y value, be careful, is negative infinity. The biggest y value is 0. That's negative infinity to 0. So obviously y is less than or equal to 0. All right? Okay. You do the next 3 in your notes packet. All right. Now, moving on to zeros. And so these words in algebra 2, zeros, x-intercepts, solutions, roots, all of these mean the same thing. Where it crosses or touches the x-axis. Okay? So, y-intercept is where it crosses or touches the y-axis. You can write these as x equals. These will also always have a number with 0. Okay, that is a coordinate. Y-intercept, you write as y equals, right? That's going to be that's going to be 0 and then the number. Okay. All right. So my x-intercept, it touches at 4. So it's x equals 4. X equals 4. So that's the x. Remember, this is the x-axis. This is the y-axis. That's at like, let's say 3.5. Y equals 3.5. As long as your number makes sense, you're fine. Okay, it's got to be between 3 and 4. All right. My x-intercepts, okay, that crosses there, that crosses there. So I got an x equals negative 3. X equals 2.5 is fine. X equals negative 3. X equals 2.5. Okay. That crosses the y-axis at y equals negative 4. Okay. So you got to remember that from algebra 1. Okay. All right. Okay. The zeros. Okay. That's going to be here and here. So that's going to be x equals negative 1.5 and x equals 2. X equals negative 1.5. X equals 2. My y-intercept is that number there. Y equals 3. Okay. All right. So you can go ahead and finish the last few problems in your notes packet, and then you can proceed to work on the homework. All right, to reinforce what we learned.